Dancing in the Light by Dino1329. Winter blanketed Hogwarts in a way that felt impossibly magical. Snow fell in flurries across the castle grounds. The white-covered landscape glittered in the pale light of the enchanted lanterns lining the corridors. Excitement was in the air. The Yule Ball was no ordinary dance. It was a tradition steeped in history, a night where wizards and witches came together in a celebration of magic and camaraderie. But for Harry Potter, this particular Yule Ball meant something far more nerve-wracking. Seated by the fireplace in the Gryffindor common room, he barely noticed the crackling warmth of the flames or the chatter of his housemates buzzing about their dates and dress robes. He twirled a loose thread on his sweater, staring blankly at the fire, his mind far from the festive energy. "Harry, you're doing it again." Hermione Granger's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. She sat cross-legged in the chair beside him, her expression both curious and concerned. "Doing what?" Harry asked, feigning ignorance. "Brooding," Hermione said matter-of-factly. "You've been quiet for days, and I know it's not just about the ball. What's going on?" Harry sighed, shaking his head. "It's nothing, Hermione." "It's never nothing with you," Hermione pressed. Across the room, Ron was slumped in an armchair, lazily tossing a quaffle in the air. He glanced over, eyebrows furrowing. "She's right, mate. If you're nervous about asking someone to the ball, you've got nothing to worry about. Loads of people would say yes." Harry fought the urge to groan. They were so far off the mark it was almost laughable. His problem wasn't finding a date, it was deciding whether to show up with the one he already had. "I've got it sorted, all right," Harry said quickly, standing up. Hermione tilted her head, studying him. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." As he climbed the stairs to his dormitory, he felt Hermione's gaze lingering on him, her curiosity practically tangible. The astronomy tower had become their refuge, a place where Harry and Draco could exist without the weight of expectations, house rivalries, or the fear of prying eyes. It was a precarious secret they'd guarded for months. That evening, cloaked under his invisibility cloak, Harry navigated the winding corridors of the castle. The chill of the winter air grew sharper as he ascended the spiral staircase, but he barely noticed. When he stepped onto the tower's parapet, he saw Draco standing by the edge, his pale blonde hair catching the moonlight. "You're late," Draco said, his voice cutting through the stillness. Harry let the cloak fall from his shoulders, revealing himself. "I had to wait for Ron and Hermione to stop interrogating me." Draco smirked, turning to face him. "Still keeping secrets from your little fan club, I see." "Still terrified of what your father will do if he finds out about us, I see," Harry countered, a teasing lilt in his voice. Draco's smirk faltered, and Harry instantly regretted the jab. "I'm sorry," Harry said, stepping closer. Draco sighed, shaking his head. "No, you're right. I am terrified. But not of him. I'm terrified of what will happen to us once everyone knows." The weight of Draco's words hung heavy in the air. They had spent countless nights debating whether to keep their relationship a secret or reveal it to the world. For Draco, the stakes were monumental. The Malfoy name carried expectations that didn't allow for deviation or scandal. "Draco," Harry said softly, reaching for his hand. "You don't have to do this. Not yet. We can wait." Draco's fingers tightened around his jaw set with determination. "No, I'm tired of hiding. If you can face down Voldemort, I can face a few snide remarks and disapproving stares." Harry studied him, his heart swelling with pride and affection. "You're braver than you think." A faint blush crept into Draco's cheeks as he quickly turned away, muttering, "Don't get sappy on me, Potter." Harry laughed, leaning against the parapet beside him. They stood in silence for a moment, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds. The lights from the castle windows cast a warm glow across the landscape, and for a fleeting moment the world felt peaceful. The day of the Yule Ball arrived in a flurry of last-minute preparations. The great hall had been transformed overnight into a winter wonderland, with forest-covered trees, floating snowflakes, and tables laden with enchanted ice sculptures. Students rushed through the corridors, exchanging excited whispers about their dates and outfits. Harry, meanwhile, was doing his best to avoid the endless stream of questions from his friends. "Harry," Hermione began for the third time that morning, "if you have a date, why don't you tell us who it is?" "Because it's none of your business," Harry replied, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "It's always our business," Ron chimed in, slinging an arm around Harry's shoulders. "Come on, mate, who is it? Cho? Ginny? One of the Patil twins?" Harry shook Ron off, groaning. "You'll find out tonight." Ron frowned, but Hermione narrowed her eyes, her expression thoughtful. "You're acting strange, Harry." "Maybe I'm just tired of your noisiness," Harry shot back, though his tone was more playful than harsh. Hermione sighed, clearly unsatisfied, but she let the matter drop. By the time evening fell, the castle was buzzing with anticipation. Harry stood in front of the mirror in his dormitory, adjusting the emerald green dress robes Draco had insisted he wear. The fabric was smooth and luxurious, fitting him perfectly, but Harry couldn't shake the nerve twisting in his stomach. "You look fine," Ron said from his bed, where he was struggling with the clasp on his maroon robes. "Whoever your date is, they'll be impressed." Harry smiled faintly, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. The entrance hall was a sea of colour and sound as students gathered, their robes shimmering under the light of the enchanted chandeliers. Laughter and excited chatter filled the air, but Harry barely registered it as it descended the staircase. Draco was waiting at the bottom, his silver and black robes glinting faintly as he stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was calm, but Harry could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. "You're late," Draco said, a familiar smirk tugging at his lips. "Had to make an entrance," Harry replied, smiling. Draco rolled his eyes, but extended his arm. Harry hesitated only for a moment before taking it. The moment they stepped into the great hall together, the buzz of conversation abruptly stopped. Gasps of shock echoed through the room, followed by a wave of murmurs and whispers. "Is that Malfoy? With Potter? They're holding hands!" Draco's grip on Harry's arm tightened slightly, but his expression remained composed. Harry, for his part, forced himself to keep walking, his chin held high. From the Gryffindor table, Ron and Hermione were staring, their faces frozen in identical expressions of disbelief. "Bloody hell," Ron muttered, earning a sharp nudge from Hermione. Harry caught Hermione's eye, silently willing her to understand. She raised her eyebrows, clearly stunned, but she didn't look angry. As they reached the centre of the room, Pansy Parkinson stormed over, her face a mixture of shock and outrage. "Draco!" she hissed, her voice low but furious. "What the hell are you doing?" Draco raised an eyebrow, his tone icy. "Enjoying the ball? Is that a problem?" "With him!" she spat, glaring at Harry. "Have you lost your mind?" Draco smirked, his confidence returning in full force. "Careful, Pansy. Jealousy isn't a good look on you." Pansy's face turned an alarming shade of red, but before she could retort, the music swelled, signalling the start of the first dance. Draco turned to Harry, his smirk softening into something genuine. "Shall we?" Harry nodded, ignoring the stares as Draco led him onto the dance floor. The first notes of waltz filled the air as Harry and Draco took their positions. The first few moments were awkward, with Harry stumbling over his own feet and Draco muttering under his breath about Gryffindors and their lack of grace. But as the music followed, they found their rhythm, moving together in perfect harmony. Harry smiled, his heart fluttering as Draco's gaze softened. The moment stretched out between them, a space where nothing existed but the two of them standing beneath the arched stone doorway of the Gryffindor Tower. The bustling noise of the Yule Ball seemed a world away now. "Good night, Harry," Draco said, his voice low and sincere, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from Harry's forehead. Harry's pulse quickened, his gaze shifting from Draco's eyes to his lips. He had been dreaming of this moment for so long, of the feeling of being this close to Draco without the fear of being caught, without the secrecy, the lies, the pretending. Now everything was out in the open. "Good night," Harry replied, his voice barely above a whisper. And then, on impulse, he closed the gap between them, pressing his lips to Draco's in a kiss that was both tender and full of quiet promise. The kiss was brief but powerful, long enough to feel the electricity between them, long enough to confirm what Harry had known deep down for a long time. He pulled away slowly, his hands lingering on Draco's shoulders, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't quite put into words. Draco's lips curved into a soft, genuine smile. "You have no idea how much I wanted to do that," he said, his voice full of quiet warmth. "I think I have a pretty good idea," Harry replied with a smirk. "Yeah?" Draco asked, raising an eyebrow. "What gave me away?" "Well," Harry said with a chuckle, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of Draco's sleeve, "you've been looking at me like that all night." Draco rolled his eyes, but couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You always were a perceptive one." "Don't let it go to your head," Harry teased, but he couldn't help the warmth spreading through his chest. "Good night, Draco." Draco gave him one last lingering look, a mixture of fondness and something else Harry couldn't quite name. "Night, Potter." As Harry turned to walk into the tower, he could feel the lingering presence of Draco behind him. He glanced over his shoulder, catching sight of Draco's figure fading into the night, and his heart skipped a beat. This was just the beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of mixed reactions. Harry had prepared himself for the whispers, the stares, the questions. He'd known they would come. But nothing could have fully prepared him for how quickly things escalated after their public display at the Yule Ball. The next morning, when Harry entered the great hall, it was as though a storm had rolled in. The air was thick with hushed conversations, eyes darting towards him as he made his way to the Gryffindor table. He could hear snatches of conversation, words like Potter and Malfoy and together, floating around the room, and though none of it was particularly hostile, it was impossible to ignore the tension in the air. Ron and Hermione were already seated, and they both looked up as Harry sat down. Ron's face was a mixture of disbelief and confusion, while Hermione's was carefully composed, but Harry could see the curiosity in her eyes. "All right, mate?" Ron asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," Harry replied, his eyes not meeting Ron's. Hermione leaned forward, her tone softer. "I didn't realise you two. I didn't know," she trailed off, unsure of how to phrase it. Harry sighed, putting his food around his plate. "Neither did I, Hermione." "You two are serious, then?" Ron asked, still looking bewildered. You've been sneaking around, but wow." "Yeah," Harry muttered. "I guess we are." Hermione reached across the table, her hand resting gently on Harry's. "It's okay, Harry. You don't need to explain anything to us. We're just surprised, but we support you." Ron's expression softened. "Yeah, I might have trouble getting my head around it, but if you're happy, then that's what matters." "Thanks, Ron," Harry said, a small smile pulling at his lips. They didn't need to say anything else. Their quiet support was all Harry needed in that moment. As the days passed, the whispers grew louder, the judgment more apparent. Students who had once greeted Harry with respect now eyed him warily, as though his very existence had changed. Some were curious, asking him questions in hushed voices, while others avoided him altogether, their gazes cold and accusing. But the most difficult moments came in the form of the insults, the sly comments and the cruel whispers behind his back. Draco had warned him that it wouldn't be easy, but Harry hadn't realised just how deep the disdain for their relationship would run. In the corridors he heard snickers. "What's Potter doing with Malfoy? Isn't he supposed to be the chosen one, not some mudblood-loving freak?" The words stung, but Harry had learned to ignore them. Draco had his own share of struggles, but Harry was determined to stand by him. They had been through worse than gossip. They had fought against forces that sought to destroy them, and they were stronger now because of it. But there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. One evening, after a particularly brutal exchange with a group of Slytherins, Harry found himself in the library, trying to focus on his studies but unable to concentrate. His thoughts were consumed by everything that had happened, the harshness of the world they were now navigating. The library doors creaked open, and Draco's unmistakable figure appeared in the doorway. He looked around, quickly spotting Harry hunched over a table. "Potter," Draco said softly, his voice almost too quiet. Harry looked up, his heart lifting slightly at the sight of Draco. Despite the weight of the world pressing down on him, Draco had a calming effect. "Hey," Harry replied, his voice a bit hoarse. "What are you doing here?" Draco walked over, sitting across from him, his gaze warm but concerned. "I could ask you the same thing. You don't look like you're studying, and I've seen how you react to the Slytherins." Harry chuckled weakly, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, well, they've been particularly loud today." Draco reached out, his fingers lightly brushing Harry's hand. "Ignore them. They're just trying to get under your skin." "I know," Harry said, his eyes meeting Draco's. "But it's hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to get used to it." Draco's gaze softened, and he squeezed Harry's hand gently. "You won't have to face it alone. I'm here, Harry. I always will be." Harry felt a lump form in his throat, and for the first time in days he allowed himself to truly relax, leaning into Draco's touch. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat in silence for a while, their hands intertwined, the world outside the library forgotten. By the time spring arrived, the tension surrounding Harry and Draco's relationship had dulled, if only slightly. They had grown used to the whispers, the stares, the occasional cruel comment, but they had also learned how to navigate it together, stronger as a couple than they had ever been before. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever was. At the end of their final year, Harry and Ron stood side by side looking out over the vast grounds of Hogwarts, their fingers once again intertwined. They were no longer hiding, no longer pretending. They had faced the world together, and though it had been difficult, Harry couldn't imagine being anywhere else with anyone else. "Think we'll ever get used to this?" Harry asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Draco glanced at him, his eyes soft but resolute. "No," he replied, "but I wouldn't have it any other way." And Harry knew, in that moment, that whatever came next, whatever the world had in store for them, they would face it together, as equals, as partners. Because love, in its truest form, had no bounds. Thank you for listening. I am sorry that it took me so long to upload again, but my mental health has not been that great. I would also like to point out that even though I love Harry Potter, I do not love J.K. Rowling because of the transphobic things she has said. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time.